Poland's new law seen as reining in the country's state media.
Opozycja mówi o zawłaszczeniu mediów publicznych, politycy PiS-u ich naprawie.
Poland's government has warned Brussels not to get involved based on bias.
Wprowadzenie sygnalizowanych zmian strukturalnych i personalnych będzie oznaczać krok wstecz.
The 28-nation bloc is unlikely to resort to any punitive measures.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. These are some of the media stories we're looking at this week. Warsaw and Budapest. How much can the governments there get away with on freedom of the press before the EU does something about it? The perilous task of reporting on the underreported. The drone war in northwestern Pakistan. Turkey's government issues a ban on coverage of the bombing in Istanbul, but the Turkish media tell the story anyway. And
basically a human selfie stick.
Instagram, the story from behind the lens. And it's not a pretty picture. 3 months ago, Poles elected the Law and Justice Party, led by Jaroslaw Kaczynski, to a parliamentary majority. Kaczynski's party is anti-Russian, distrustful of Germany, and suspicious of immigrants. And with its strong emphasis on what it calls traditional Polish values, the government clearly wants domestic media organizations to get behind its nationalist message. A few weeks ago, the lower house there passed a law giving the government the power to directly appoint the heads of TVP, Poland's public broadcaster, as well as other state-owned media outlets. Some senior staff at TVP saw the writing on the wall. They did not wait to be pushed. They resigned before the bill became the law. That legislation has also raised concerns further west in Brussels, where European Union officials have threatened to throw the book at Poland for what they see as a turn toward the authoritarian. But as we've seen with Hungary, on matters of media freedom, the EU talks a good game but lacks teeth. Poland's Kaczynski is an admirer of Hungary's Viktor Orbán, whose Fidesz party has reshaped that country's media in its own ultra-conservative image. Given that the EU has had little influence on what's happened to the media in Hungary, there's little reason to believe that things will turn out differently in Poland. Our starting point this week is Warsaw. Four voices, four distinct perspectives on the story in Poland. Two journalists in Warsaw, one who opposes the new media legislation, one who supports it. An Italian academic, a specialist on pluralism in European media. And the Hungarian journalist who, when the media law was passed by the new government in Warsaw, saw Hungary the sequel.
The approach of the new Polish government is very similar to the approach of the Hungarian government in terms of public media. In their understanding, public media or state media should make better known what the government wants and argue in favor of all the government decisions.
TVP was a bad public broadcaster, and it needed fresh blood, a reshuffle, new energy, new vitality. It needs to be brought back to life. Obviously, creating national media, you need to hire staff who will fit well in the new structure. Being made redundant is not a purge. It's just people losing jobs. This happens everywhere.
Not like this, it doesn't. The previous government tried to meddle with state-owned media too, attempting to pass a media law, but it was vetoed by the then president, Lech Kaczynski, the late twin brother of Jaroslaw, the head of the Law and Justice Party now in power. The law the new government has passed terminates with immediate effect the directors of state-owned TVP and gives the Treasury Minister the power to choose their successors.
Widzimy się dziś po raz ostatni.
TVP's best-known news anchor is no longer on the air. Several senior network figures quit before they could be fired, and then the terminations began. And that's just Polish media reform phase 1. A second law is expected in June that would terminate all state media employees, forcing them to reapply to new bosses handpicked by the new government.
These measures are really unproportionate and willing to restrict media pluralism in the country. And of course, the new law that was rumored to be passed in the next future is another attempt of clear the way and reconstruct the public service media in a way that is completely consistent with the government.
To, co się dzieje w tej chwili w telewizji, przypomina mi...
What is happening now in state TV reminds me of 1981, the beginning of martial law, when General Jaruzelski cleansed the media. Under this new law, the process will be the opposite. All journalists will be fired, and only the ones who declare loyalty to the new government will be hired back. There are no written criteria journalists will need to fulfill, but it's obvious that they will be ideological in nature, namely ideology which is suitable for the Law and Justice Party.
Odpowiadające prawu i sprawiedliwości.
The Listening Post asked the Polish government to comment for this story but received no response. On January 6th, the day before the new media law took effect, Jaroslaw Kaczynski met with the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán. Hungarians have been protesting against Orbán's media policies since 2010, when he created a media council with the power to impose big fines on news outlets, websites, and blogs for the vaguest of offenses. Orbán's council can even block international news outlets from broadcasting into Hungary if it disapproves of the content.
The Polish approach is more, let's say, direct somehow, because with this law, the Polish government tries to reconstruct, to build again public service media that is consistent with this point of view. And the strategy that Hungary used, according again to my perspective, is a little bit more sophisticated.
We will find our own solutions. We don't have to look at Hungary. Criticism of Hungary may be justified in some aspects, but the majority of this criticism was propaganda, coming from the same sources as criticism of what's happening in Poland now. What's happening now in Poland is normal.
The EU criticized the Orbán government but did nothing because it lacked the power. When it comes to the media, the EU has been a demanding gatekeeper but a compliant security guard. It has insisted on high press freedom standards when prospective member states apply for entry, but has tolerated governments like Hungary's eroding those standards once they're in.
It will be really difficult to curb what's happening in Poland due to the fact that EU missed to do this in the case of Hungary, because all these legislations are following the Hungarian example. So the Polish government could just say, look, we are doing whatever Hungary has done, so what's your problem? It's approved by the European Union.
The European Commission argues that things are different now. This past week, it launched a probe into Poland and the media under new powers established in 2014 that theoretically could result in the suspension of Poland's EU voting rights. That would be a first. Politicians within the EU aren't waiting. They've criticized Poland over its media law. Some of them serve in the Merkel government in Germany, whose chancellor was then attacked by some Polish publications depicted as a Nazi out to conquer Poland once again. Those outlets echo the narrative of governments in Warsaw and Budapest, in reviving German and Soviet ghosts of the past, the idea that the EU in Brussels is the new Berlin or the new Moscow.
To jest częste w Polsce zjawisko.
In Poland, this comes up very often. If you want to scare the public, bring up the Germans and take advantage of the traumatic history of Polish-German relations. Presenting Merkel in the Wehrmacht uniform is a disgraceful act. It's a cynical use of trauma and an awakening of demons. This is purely political. The Law and Justice Party's attitude towards the EU is purely cynical and utilitarian. Give us money and don't expect anything from us. Yes to money, no to values.
Pieniądze tak, wartości nie.
These countries have always been under occupation. And when the Polish government is arguing that Berlin or Brussels want to tell Warsaw what to do, it's aimed at the local domestic audiences, and its goal is to gain support in their fight against Brussels, which is very often depicted in Hungary as Moscow. So the old Soviet rule, they want to tell us what to do and we have to fight against. So it goes back to this national sentiment that these are once again oppressors against whom we have to fight.
The difference being that neither Germany in the late 1930s nor the Soviet Union after World War II gave Poland or Hungary a choice. Both countries joined the EU voluntarily in 2004. They applied, and they both met requisite standards on freedom of the press that both have since abandoned in the name, their governments now say, of freedom. On the download now, our viewers weigh in on the state of the media in Poland and the role of the EU in the story.
Since the fall of the communism in Poland, public media and especially public television has always been under a great political pressure. So basically, it's not the way to provide more valuable information and establish new modern framework of public media in Poland. It's just another example of the takeover of public institutions in order to fulfill short-term political aims.
But what is most troubling in this situation is not the media law on its own, but the fact that it comes in a series of laws that aim at controlling the public sphere and the way in which Polish citizens think, such as changes to the Constitutional Tribunal and the new police law, which is being discussed right now and which would give the police the ability to control all internet activities of citizens.
Other media stories that are on our radar this week, 2.5 years after its launch, Al Jazeera America has announced it's shutting down.
Al Jazeera America.
The channel came into existence after the purchase of another broadcaster, Current TV, for a reported $500 million. Through that acquisition, Al Jazeera America inherited Current's existing contracts with U.S. cable companies, giving it access to roughly 60 million American households. However, as the network's CEO, Al Anstey, put it in an email to staff, the channel's closure was driven by the fact that our business model is simply not sustainable in light of the economic challenges in the U.S. media marketplace. In announcing the end of the road for the channel, the Doha-based Al Jazeera Media Network said it will still target American audiences by expanding its digital operations. Al Jazeera America will cease broadcasting by April 30th this year. That suicide bombing in the tourist district of Istanbul has been widely reported across Turkey despite a ban on coverage issued by the government. The order came from the Turkish Radio and Television Supreme Council and called for a temporary media ban on coverage, which most outlets then ignored. Initially, the state-owned network, TRT, did obey the order, running stories on topics like road construction projects before it too turned to the bombing. Opposition leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu mocked the government's attempt to control the flow of information. A suicide bomb explodes in a place like Istanbul, he said. Then what do? You impose a ban on reporting even before ambulances arrive. Or, as this Norwegian historian tweeted, the Turkish media ban is actually a much better reason not to be a tourist there than an explosion or two. New president, new chapter in the media story in Argentina. This week, a popular voice on radio, Victor Hugo Morales, had his show on Radio Continental canceled. Hugo Morales was a supporter of the ex-president, Cristina Kirchner. He's been critical of the new Macri government. As of today, he tweeted, "I no longer have a show. This is what the political right wing needs to silence voices." Tens of thousands were on the streets of Buenos Aires the next day to protest the firing, along with measures the new government is taking that will affect the Argentinian media space. President Mauricio Macri, whose Let's Change coalition won the elections in November, is trying to reverse a media reform law pushed through by the Kirchner government. That law was designed to break up media monopolies, its main target a huge conglomerate called Clarín. Macri has gone to court to request a presidential decree, which would give him the legal right to reverse the law without the consent of the National Congress. For more than a decade now, the federally administered tribal areas of northwest Pakistan, known as FATA, have been unstable and dangerous. Bordering Afghanistan, the mountainous, inhospitable lands are home to Pashtun tribals and at least 6 recognized militant groups. Reporting FATA is a perilous assignment for any journalist to accept. The region has been targeted by American drone strikes ever since 2004. And the drone war is one of the toughest stories to get at in the so-called war on terror. Reporting on the effects of drone strikes on the ground, on the people there, has led to a number of journalists in the Northwest getting killed. FATA, and especially Waziristan on its southern edges, is militarized, locked down. Few reporters even try to go there anymore. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now with the story of one of them and what he's up against, reporting on the state of war in northwestern Pakistan.
North Waziristan, remote, difficult to navigate, the heart of the Pakistani Army's most recent campaign to root out militants, Operation Zarb-e-Azb, and the site of more than a decade of US drone attacks. This is where Noor Behram works.
Noor Behram is a very unique journalist, local journalist from North Waziristan, who has shown tremendous courage in documenting a number of drone strikes.
By taking photos of survivors and families of victims right after an attack takes place. Actually, most of the photos that you see in the international media belong to Noor Behram.
Noor Behram was the first journalist who came to me saying, I have collected evidence of a huge number of civilians being killed. And that was a very unique perspective from a local journalist in Waziristan.
When the drone attack started, I saw a big difference between what was being reported and the actual reality on the ground. The breaking news would just say 5 or 6 terrorists have been killed in a drone attack. So I took it upon myself to give a voice to all those women and children who were killed. No one could call them terrorists or accuse them of participating in the fighting.
Behram's very presence and ability to do journalistic work in the federally administered tribal region is a feat of survival and smarts. Under the law, almost no local news outlets can operate in FATA. All the newspapers and magazines the locals read are produced on the outside, in Islamabad, Karachi, Lahore, Muzaffarabad, and brought in for distribution. There are no TV outlets based in FATA. There are 3 state-run radio stations and numerous underground radio outfits operating illegally. But journalism that interrogates the militants, the army, the US, co-opted tribes in the region, all of whom have a stake in FATA, is almost non-existent. And then there are the pressures and very real dangers of living and working amidst groups like the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, the Haqqani Network, and elements of ISIL or Daesh.
Coverage is terribly difficult, without a doubt. It's tough to get there as a regular Pakistani. It's even tougher to get there as a journalist. And then when you sort of cross past certain areas from mainland Pakistan, well, it becomes a free-for-all. Your safety is not guaranteed. Most journalists who have been killed in the last decade or so in Pakistan have ended up being killed inside these regions.
You ask me what are the pressures created by the army, the government, and the other intelligence bodies? Firstly, these are all individual players. You cannot consider them as one unit. You cannot prepare for them as one unit. Then there are the Talibs and the dozens of other organizations working here. Al-Qaeda, the Uzbeks, foreign militias, even Daesh. It means there is a constant clash of agendas and someone is always unhappy. And that's why they pressurize us journalists.
So for instance, in 2006, Hayatullah Mahsoud was killed. He was a journalist who had taken photos of missile parts of American Hellfire missiles. This was at a time when the US and Pakistan were both denying the fact that the US was bombing the tribal areas. And Hayatullah actually took photographs of these fragments and passed them on to a European press agency. The very next day, Hayatullah was disappeared for 5-6 months, and then his body was found shot to death.
That was 2006, one of the worst years for the media in FATA, when a total of 3 journalists were killed. And the pattern continued. In 2007, print correspondent Noor Hakim Khan, killed by a roadside bomb. In 2011, Nasrullah Khan Afridi of the Khyber News Agency, blown up in his car. And last year, the Taliban claimed responsibility for the murder of Muhammad Zaman Mahsoud. For Noor Behram and his colleagues, survival is job one.
This is a tribal region. At night, there's no communication or phone system in place to relay news. Another thing, journalists have no access to information. Nobody listens to you, nobody talks to you. The Taliban and Al-Qaeda will simply call us up if they need us. But when we need a comment from them, there's no way of finding them. With all these problems that we face, we have to be very cautious because if we get anything wrong, the impact could be significant for us and for our careers.
I went and made contact with people in the different villages, and they became my sources. They would notify me whenever there was a drone attack in their area through walkie-talkie systems. They would tell me how many women and children have died, and I would go to the area and gather evidence. No one records how many women and children are killed. Everybody knows which terrorist died and which didn't. But no one asks about the women and children casualties.
Keeping track of the dead is a very inexact science. According to the UK-based Bureau of Investigative Journalism's drone project, since 2004, between 430 and 970 civilians have been killed in drone strikes in northwest Pakistan. Noor Behram tries to put faces and names to those statistics, turning cold data into real stories. Journalists working in FATA say it's like reporting from inside the crocodile's den. But not everyone is interested, not even in Pakistan.
The most unfortunate part of Noor Behram's work has been that it was not appreciated by local outlets. In Pakistani media, this is not a top priority because the mainstream, especially English media, prioritize where their most readership is. So for example, Dawn is the leading English newspaper in Pakistan. Almost 60% to 70% of their readership is in Karachi. So for a person in Karachi, some drone strike happening in a remote area of Waziristan is not a priority.
The Pakistani media is facing a lot of threats and a lot of issues from a variety of forces. And so in that context, they have to be very careful in what they report and how they report. So you now have a situation where sometimes media houses will find it easier to publish a wire service report rather than publishing reported stories from their own journalists, and because it's safer.
What happens in Waziristan stays in Waziristan. That's been the logic primarily of both the security forces, the administration, as well as the bad guys. Stringers, local journalists are on their own, and they're between a rock and a hard place. The real challenge has been to walk that thin red line between your personal security, the sanctity of the Pakistani state, as well as your personal passion to tell the right story. It's been a very, very difficult story for all of us to tell, whether from mainland Pakistan or whether out in the mountains of Waziristan.
Northwest Pakistan is such a challenging area to cover that finding alternative news sources on the region is not easy. Wounds of Waziristan is a short documentary that's up on YouTube. You saw the director of the film in our report, Madia Tahir. In her doc, she interviews two survivors of drone strikes about life in the aftermath of the attacks. Tahir says she's trying to move the story about drones beyond the civilians versus militants binary to get at the lasting impact of the drone war on ordinary people. Tahir is also the co-founder of Tanqeed, a magazine on politics and culture. The publication does not focus solely on FATA, but does make an effort to keep the region on its radar. There's also BBC Pashto and Mashal Radio, run by Radio Free Europe. Both stations broadcast in the Pashto language spoken in northwestern Pakistan and right across Afghanistan. Their output is not solely on FATA, but given their focus on Pashtun affairs, there is coverage from northwestern Pakistan worth listening to if you speak the language. And finally, getting that perfect picture on social media sites like Instagram, one that captures that seemingly fleeting moment, can actually be a lot of work. So spare a thought for the person behind the lens, the one who takes the picture, the enabler for the aspirational. The Mystery Hour is a late-night talk show in the U.S. that produces comedy skits. This offering looks at the labor-intensive Instagram feed from the photographer husband's point of view. But let's face it, men aren't always the victims in this scenario. This is the kind of thing that works both ways. Instagram Husband has been viewed more than 4 million times online. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
My name's Jeff, and I'm an Instagram husband. Behind every cute girl on Instagram is a guy like me and a brick wall.
My name's Trey. I'm an Instagram husband. Go! I'm basically a human selfie stick.
It's become a pretty big problem. We take so long to get anywhere because we're taking pictures of our feet.
Oh, shoe pick. No, this one's better. No, stop. Move your foot. No! You can't do that! I haven't taken a shot of that yet. God, we have to show everybody how much we enjoy our lives together.
Yeah, It's really enjoyable.